Is everybody comfortable? Arthur asks. Over the next few days, I'll lose count of how many times he'll ask what becomes his trademark question of the tour. This time, he punctuates it with a grin that starts in his eyes and ends at his fingertips, as he gestures for more water, more beer, and more cigars to be passed forward, to make sure we're all as comfortable as possible. The smoke is already threading between us, obscuring Arthur's face as he begins to talk. The air is thick with it, and I wonder how it looks to pedestrians as our bus passes, smoke streaming from its windows like we've set the seats on fire. Inside, we're all enjoying the new Perdomo Special Craft Series cigars, chasing the smoke with sips of Tonya beer, and trying to look casual as we sneak glimpses through the windows of a very foreign landscape. For most of us, this is our first look at Nicaragua. Our journey is just beginning. For the next 3 days, Arthur Kemper, Vice President of Perdomo Cigars, will lead us through every step of their cigar manufacturing process, from seed selection to shipping. Our education begins on the Pan American Highway, a 19,000-mile road that winds between climates and countries, greeting jungles and deserts alike as it makes its way across the entire length of Central America. Our part of the journey is just a few short hours along the road as it rises up the mountains from Managua to Esteli, home of Tabacalera Perdomo. While Managua is the official capital of Nicaragua, Esteli is the unrivaled capital of the nation's booming cigar industry. Once a refuge for Cuban cigar makers fleeing the revolution of 1959, the city now produces so many award-winning cigars that some believe Cuba may never regain its crown. Perdomo, Padron, my father, A.J. Fernandez, and Drew Estate are just a few of the many cigar legends that call Esteli home. There are nearly 120,000 people residing in the thriving city. Most work directly in the cigar industry or in businesses which support it. Others are employed by the small hotels and restaurants scattered across the city that cater to a growing number of tourists. A bustling city center around the Old Town Square boasts several streets of tiny storefronts that employ the rest. With the unemployment rate near zero, Perdomo must run buses from their factory to towns an hour outside the city to attract employees, Arthur tells us, as he signals for more Tonya beer to be passed up from the back of the bus. The truck ahead of us slows, grinding its way over speed bumps affectionately known as dead policemen. Basically, these speed bumps were installed to make it easier for police to stop drivers. The blindfolded horse being carried in a pickup bed shifts uneasily, and a few of our fellow travelers rush to the front of the bus to snap photos of it. This is a world where horses and pickup trucks are perfectly normal. Here men on horseback chatter into cell phones as they drive cattle along the side of the road, and entire families balance on motorcycles, toddlers tucked between their parents or balanced acrobatically on the handlebars as they make their way to school and work. In Esteli, the first and third worlds exist in odd juxtaposition. Pizza Hut sits next to a concrete hovel with a tin roof that functions as a pharmacy. People live in shacks, but emerge pristine, in freshly pressed clothes. Cows walk lazily across the road in front of a shop that sells local cell phone SIM cards to foreigners. Along the way to Esteli, we stop at a gas station and discover that we can pay with U.S. dollars as easily as with the Nicaraguan Cordoba. Nicaraguans are no stranger to tourists or to the U.S. economy, a fact that becomes painfully clear at our next stop, a large market that we learn with some dismay is owned by Walmart. It's our last chance to buy sunscreen, alcohol, and Bic lighters. At last we reach La Capina, our home for the duration of the tour. La Capina is a picturesque inn with a Spanish-style central courtyard and a series of quaint cottages, just 5 minutes from the Perdomo factory. It's also home to a number of roaming, squawking guinea hens and a pair of cantankerous geese that were determined to keep Tony and I from the door to our room.
Dale para allá. Dale. Dale, negro. Go on.
Then adjourn to huge, comfortable leather chairs on the veranda, firing up cigars from a pack of Perdomo Lot 23. For the next 3 nights, the courtyard will be filled with a constant stream of our smoke, wafting between the plants and up into the night. Cuban rum, which was Tony's first purchase while still in the airport, begins to flow as we swap stories of cigars, cigar shops, and the characters who frequent them. Art asks about our favorite cigars, and Perdomo's Limited Cameroon is mentioned again and again. I've never tried it. I make a mental note to get one before the trip ends, and slip off to my room for the night. Is everybody comfortable? Indeed we are. Today we meet Silvio, second in command of the Perdomo fields and factory. For the next few hours, he introduces us to the 3 primary growing regions of Nicaragua: Jalapa, Condega, and Esteli. Perdomo blends their cigars from tobaccos from each of these regions, gaining a hint of sweetness from Jalapa, their rich aromas from Condega, and their strength, the key to a cigar's construction, from Esteli. Silvio explains how the seeds are carefully chosen, germinated, and transplanted to the fields. We learn that Perdomo is a completely vertical company, controlling every aspect of production to ensure the highest quality at each step in the process. Quality is Perdomo's highest value. It's evident in everything, from the fine art on their labels to their sophisticated systems for carefully cataloging where, within a few square meters, every leaf in each cigar was grown. This precision, we learn, is the secret to producing consistency year after year in our favorite blends. Silvio and Arthur burn with passion while they speak, one in Spanish and one in English. Then they invite us to participate. I exhale hot, humid air onto the tip of one finger and dip it cautiously into the seeds they've laid out for us, painfully aware that the jar of seeds they've opened for this little exercise is worth about $10,000. Each seed is no larger than a dot accidentally left by an ink pen. When I pull my hand back, I'm holding easily 25 seeds on my fingertip. Since Perdomo demands a 98% germination rate, nearly every one of these seeds represents a tobacco plant. Since each plant will produce 14 to 15 leaves, I have the equivalent of about 3 boxes of cigars on one finger. After a quick trip through the greenhouse to visit the seedlings, we're off to Finca Natalie, one of several Perdomo farms, this one named for Nick Perdomo's daughter, where, after some gratuitous photo taking, we're introduced to the process of fertilizing, watering, and priming the plants. Priming is the process of harvesting leaves a few at a time from the plant over the course of the growing season. I'm surprised to learn oxen are still part of the process. It turns out they're better than machinery for reopening ground that becomes compacted by the workers walking over it. Their movement through the field also naturally creates the channels workers will use to gravity feed water to the plants. In the curing barn, we stare in amazement at thousands of leaves from earlier primings drying over our heads. The air is sweet and delicious. I kick at the ashes of a fire, learning that fires are occasionally used to combat the local humidity as the leaves cure. In the afternoon, back at the Perdomo factory, we watch workers sew the cured leaves together by hand into bundles that are then stacked into tight pilones for fermentation. In the fermentation rooms, the smell of fermentation is breathtaking. A supervisor grins, confessing that even many people inside the cigar industry can't handle being in the fermenting rooms. It literally takes your breath away. It's at that exact moment that Arthur instructs us to draw on our cigars, then press our noses into bundles of the fermenting leaves. Breathe in deeply, he says. The sweet aroma permeates our every pore. The flavors of our cigars intensify, and for a moment, we taste our cigars with every one of our senses. Later, we'll have the opportunity to handle bunches of fully fermented leaves, feeling the differences between them. The Ligero leaves from the top of the plant, the strongest ones, which are rough with thick veins and surprising weight. The Viso from the middle of the plant, which are lighter and smoother, and the Seco from the bottom of the plant, the first to be primed, which are the lightest, smoothest, and most elastic of the filler leaves. Each of these experiences are firsts, impressive and enjoyable in their own right, but our most memorable moment comes unexpectedly, without fanfare, in the courtyard between buildings. There an old man stands, his thin arms crossed, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He stands perfectly still as we pass, yet radiates energy as if he might uncoil and spring at us at any moment. He raises his head to catch Arthur's eye. A glimmer shines in his own. He speaks softly, but his authority is clear, as is Arthur's affection and respect when he responds. We're standing in the presence of a legend, a man who, for 27 years, oversaw the tobacco factories of the entire Pinar del Rio province of Cuba for Fidel Castro. His story begins tomorrow's blog. The old man spreads his tobacco-stained fingers wide across the tabletop and leans forward, looking away from us, deep into his memory as he begins to speak. He has our rapt attention. This is the man of legend, the man Nick Perdomo Sr. called El Campeón, the champion. This is the man Perdomo Sr. lured from retirement in Cuba, after 27 years overseeing the famous fields and factories of the Pinar del Rio province, and brought to the fields and heat of Nicaragua, where he's worked tirelessly to help create the Perdomo legacy. This is the man who tells his tale for us on our third and final day at Tabacalera Perdomo. His stories of a young Nick Perdomo Sr. make us laugh, but eventually his tale comes to an end. Although Nick Perdomo Sr. is no longer living, the old man says, but then he cannot finish. His pause lengthens, and the loss of his friend becomes a weight on each of us. At last he continues, although Nick Sr. is no longer living, I still have a job to do. That job is to continue to help craft some of the finest cigar blends in the world. After all, a cigar is more of an art project than a commercial product. Formulas, science, and technology play their roles, but fail to recreate the expertise of the eyes, nose, hands, and mouth of the artist. It's the artist's senses and experience that craft a masterpiece, and never was this more evident than when watching the old man, Aristides Garcia, roll cigars the way he'd done for nearly a lifetime. You roll them on your legs as you work behind the oxen in the field, he explains, barely watching as his hands roll and bunch the filler, then find a leaf to bind them. Using a scrap of newspaper, he molds and presses the leaves into a perfect panatella. You have to smoke the leaves to know how they taste, how they burn, and how they smell. This is how we get to know the leaves. He has rolled cigars for each of us, and we take them with more excitement than if he were handing us the world's most expensive cigar. The blend is simple. The taste a mixture of sunlight and black soil. We're all grinning as we leave, but my grin is especially wide. I've stolen a kiss from the legend himself on my way out. Much of the rest of the day is about the process of aging a cigar, and as we step into a room full of bourbon barrels filled to the brim with leaves, I notice everyone one by one stop, close their eyes, and inhale the sensuous aromas rising through the room. We joke about colognes and candles that have never smelled this good, and exclaim with joy when more cafecito arrives. It's the perfect accompaniment to our olfactory feast. As we sip and sniff delightedly, Arthur shows off a few special blends. I'm fascinated to learn that he's one of the talents behind the company's exhibit-worthy bands. He is, in fact, the mind behind many of the brands themselves, a marketing genius whose favorite description, we learn, is buttery. When you see buttery on Perdomo packaging, you're seeing the hand of Arthur Kemper. He tells us every detail about the special Perdomo 12-year double-aged vintage and the Perdomo small batch series projects. Arthur pops open barrels and invites us to sniff the leaves and observe the difference in the leaves' color and texture as it ages. The smell is difficult to describe. Rich, delicious, earthy, with hints of chocolate. Then he takes us through the blending room, where a young man carefully selects just the right amount of each type of leaf, Ligero, Viso, and Seco, for the day's blend. I can't tell you more. The proportions are top secret. We're joined by the supervisor of the department, a firm, orderly woman whose Spanish is quick and no-nonsense. She's a top agronomist from Cuba, Arthur tells us, and Tony leans in to whisper that she's the most precise and scientific speaker we've met so far. Although I don't speak Spanish, the silent glares she gives to a worker who is standing rather than sweeping tells me all I need to know. Everything in the production part of the factory is strictly regulated, controlled, measured, and weighed. Even the scraps from the stripping stations, where the veins are removed from the center of the leaves before they're sorted for blending, will be weighed to ensure there's been no waste or loss, and even here, they can tell us where each leaf was grown and how long it cured, fermented, and aged. Eventually we reach the main attraction, the production floor, where the cigar takes its final shape, receiving its filler, binder, and wrapper. The cigars are inspected an incredible 17 times before they're boxed, most right here on this floor by roaming supervisors armed with sharp eyes and ring gauges. They gently squeeze a cigar between their fingers, testing for soft spots, carefully check for damage, and double-check the ring gauge. Each cigar is then removed for draw testing. A machine pushes a puff of air into the cigar, measuring the resistance, too much or too little, and the cigar will be sent back to be re-rolled. The operation is immense and impressive, so it makes little sense to us when the rollers stop their lightning-quick hands and begin to applaud us. They're grateful you're here. They know how important you are to us, Arthur explains, but the awkwardness of the moment lingers. It's finally broken by the appearance of Sara Gonzales. Small in stature, the woman wears an enormous smile. She seems a bit shy and tries to slink away, but Arthur calls her back to us. This is the woman who once approached Nick Perdomo Jr. in a restaurant in Miami to ask if she could see his cigar. When he gave it to her, her sure hands and trained eyes belied her experience. Sara Gonzales had spent 18 years in the Cuban tobacco industry. Perdomo hired her on the spot, another import to Nicaragua. She joined the team when he was just starting the business, working out of a room in his townhouse. Today, Arthur announces that she's retiring after 20-plus years with Perdomo. She'll fly back to the States over the weekend. It's clear an era has come to an end, and we feel both the pride and pain of the moment with them both. In the afternoon, we pass through the company's box factory, where they make each and every box and wooden sign. In a smaller, private carpentry shop, they're working strictly on prototypes, but we miss the secrets that are quickly whisked away. Finally, we visit the box factory manager's office, a kind of mini-museum, where samples of all their product line the shelves. Some of the boxes are no longer available for sale anywhere in the world. Bringing it all together, we enter the final cigar aging rooms, where the inventory waits to be banded, cellophaned, and packed in their beautiful boxes. Here, each cigar's blend marries, mellowing to their distinctive flavors. A team of women meticulously color sort every cigar that comes out of the aging room to match in each box, separating the exact number of cigars needed per box. These color-sorted cigars go directly to the packaging department, where they're banded by hand and then put into cellophane. Each cigar goes through the most rigorous final inspection before all the final details are put on each box, and they're packed to ship all over the world. As we leave the factory for the final time, Tony continues to give Arthur a hard time over a few limited release products we'd like to see at your cigar den, but aren't privileged enough, yet, to order. A conversation they've already had several times on the tour, and I think Tony is beginning to wear Arthur down, which makes me grin. I have little doubt those particular cigars will be at the shop within the year. As the evening cools, we gather once again on the hotel's broad veranda. As his final gift, Arthur shares tips on merchandising, but my mind is spent. I stare off into the darkness of the night and take a long draw of that little Cameroon I'd been hearing so much about. My sigh of pleasure must have been loud enough to interrupt. Sorry, Arthur, but sometimes you should let the cigars speak for themselves.